All right, folks. Definitely glad to be here with y'all on a Monday afternoon here at the radio show with Marc Lee, which of course is airing on IBM.TV, the internet broadcast media. So we are definitely glad to be here with them and part of their family. So definitely always glad to have that going on. And of course, I've had the chance to talk to them about a number of things on the course of the last few days and some of the shows that have aired here. We've actually had the pleasure of talking about the importance of voting and getting out there and voting, because we do know that that is almost a month from now. So a very important type of subject to talk about on a regular basis. And of course, we are also dealing with the pandemic and all that is going on in the concerns of people's health and in those regards. So definitely a lot of things are going on. Also, we're having, of course, different things happening in the sports world. Unfortunately, the team that I root for, the Milwaukee Brewers, slipped into the playoffs with a horrible record, and they then made a quick exit, but went to school in Milwaukee and became a fan of theirs. And then, like I said, I was rooting for them, and they made a quick exit. But at least in the NBA, we did have some folks that are at least trying to make somewhat of a contest of it, even though a lot of folks are already thinking that the Lakers are pretty much a given to win. But at least Miami did give them a run for their money and won the game yesterday. So it's a 2-1 series in that regard. And of course, I've got some schoolmates, they are much younger than me, but they went and had a chance to play as well. So Jimmy Butler is a Marquette graduate, as am I, and also Jay Crowder. So glad to see that they are doing well and are competing with the Miami Heat, and that they are at least trying to make a contest of it and not get swept, because you never want to have a championship where somebody gets swept. So that's some of the things that are going on in the world. I know that I stepped outside earlier, and we're definitely having some fall-like weather. It's starting to get a little bit cooler and all of that. So that's some of the things that are going on in this world right now. But right now, I'm getting ready to bring in my guest, and I am so glad to have Deidre join us. Deidre Hodge, who is the person that runs the Full Frame Film Festival, and I've known Deidre now for a while, and I'm always glad to see Deidre Hodge in the house. Did a little bit of research and all of that, and was amazed that I learned that she had worked on a couple of shows in her acting career and everything that I actually was a fan of, because I will admit it, I actually did watch some of those soap opera type shows and things of that nature, and she
Then
did
we're
some work
showing our
on
age.
that.
That's a very long time ago.
Yes, I know it was a very long time ago and all of that, but you did work on that, and you did work on the Star Trek set as well, another show that I am a big time fan of and all of that. But now you're doing the work with Full Frame, and as you know, I am a big fan of the Full Frame Festival. You've done all kinds of amazing work with that festival. I know that this year was difficult because of the virus and all of that, but y'all did find a way to make it work virtually. So I'd love to hear you talk to folks about how y'all made it work this year, what the plans are possibly for next year. And of course, I do want to explore a little bit about how you even got into the world of documentary filmmaking and the world of acting and some of the other things that you have done. Because like I said, when I did the research, I was amazed at some of the things that you did. And also some things that you touched on, because I know we like to talk to folks about their passions and things of that nature. And one of the films that you produced dealt with how the creative genius and mental health are tied together. So hopefully we'll get to explore a little bit of that as well. But definitely that's just some of the things that I want to talk to you about. And that's why I want to invite you to join this platform and everything. So I guess the first question I'll ask is how you got involved in the film industry. Like I said, you grew up in the Chapel Hill area, from what I understand, but then you have moved around and lived in different places, and your parents were involved in entrepreneurial work and all of that and involved in business. So how'd you go from having a family of business owners to getting involved in the world of film and particularly documentary filmmaking?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I actually grew up on the East Coast. I grew up right outside of New York City, and I'm the youngest of three daughters. My mom's actually from Arkansas. We lost her last year. And my dad was from Long Island, and they met in the military. So my parents were actually both officers in the military. But my dad transferred pretty quickly and worked most of his career for IBM. And worked between Japan and the United States a great deal in his career. And later in his career moved over to Gartner Group, and he retired back to where he went to school, believe it or not, Clemson. So he went to Clemson and wore a leather football helmet. So that's how long he's been a Golden Tiger. My mom was a nurse, a career nurse, and would have been a doctor in a different time, if she had had that opportunity. But it was nursing school that got her into the military and out of the South and up to the Northeast. So I actually was born south of the Mason-Dixon line, as my mother liked to say, in Maryland when my dad was working in DC. I grew up in Connecticut, and I just always knew that I wanted to be able to affect change in the world. And I had certain talents that lent themselves to going into school to study acting and music. And so I did that. I went to SUNY Purchase, which is a state school, State University of New York. Those years were called the SUNY Mafia because I went to school in the same year as Edie Falco and Stan Tucci and Ving Rhames. And so it was a very creative time in that program. It was a conservatory program. I went right out of school and went into acting, but tired of it relatively soon. I left New York and went to Los Angeles, where I met my husband. And documentary at that time was still not as popular as it is now.
Right.
But I was able to work in the documentary field as a producer and work between universities and government agencies and entertainment to really work in that field and how media affects government work and how government work then communicates with the entertainment industry. And that became a large part of my work. And I kept doing that even after we moved to Chapel Hill. And we actually moved to Chapel Hill in 2006 for my husband to run Playmakers Repertory on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. And he is a Tar Heel.
So he's a native Tar Heel and everything. So he's originally from this area, and now you're here living with him and your child and all of that. Who did they follow in that field as well? I've always wondered that whether like your whether children follow in the footsteps. I know like I do radio. My parents were actually involved in radio. So is your child involved at all in the field of entertainment? Or did they look at you and your dad going like, I'm not going to do that?
No, actually, and my husband grew up in Miami, did his graduate work at UNC Chapel Hill, and we now live in Minnesota. I've been working remotely for the last 5-6 years. Wow. But our daughter actually, like so many kids her age, and this is actually thanks to the public schools in North Carolina, she started studying Latin, a dead language, when she was in middle school. And I think our kids have Harry Potter to thank for that. Okay. A lot of them became interested in Latin and things like that. So she's actually a classics anthropology major. She's she can tell you anything about the ancient world, and she can read Latin. She can read ancient Greek. She's not at all like us. Not at all.
Wow.
God bless her. But she's been to every full frame and she loves them.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of full frame, as is my dad and a number of my friends and all of that. Did you ever think that when you were working in New York and Los Angeles that you would actually be involved as much as you are in the documentary world? Was it always a passion with yours? And how did you first get involved in the acting world? Because like I said, I do know that you did a little bit of that quote unquote Hollywood kind of acting and everything, but was it always a passion of yours in terms of being involved on the acting side and then coming into producing side, or was producing something you always wanted to do, or how did you get involved in producing?
It's a really good question. First of all, the leap from college to acting was easier because I was in a very high-powered conservatory. So the agents wanted students like that right out of school. So I very quickly signed before I graduated, and then moved to LA. And it was actually on a series I was doing, a very long time series, that the executive producer said to me, you're a lovely actor, but you're really a producer, because I tend to see the whole, and really good actors see their role. So they see that part of it, but I tend to see things from 30,000 feet above. So I see the whole picture and how they intersect together really well. It's just how I'm wired. And he had suggested I become a producer, and I put it in the back of my mind because I was working and I was, doing okay. And I had the opportunity. I kind of got bored with the acting. I was getting older. I was married. I wanted to have a baby. And an opportunity came to me to produce a film that was a documentary that dealt with tobacco use in Hollywood. And so I was able to use all the people I knew in LA and gather them together to make this film. And we had Sean Penn and Ted Danson and Rob Reiner and, Christy Turlington, and a lot of people came on camera. And producing that film taught me a lot. And that was a long time ago, though. That was when people still thought of documentary as, eating your broccoli,
Right. Yeah.
And that introduced me to the world of really what became called later impact producing.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, I met Nancy Bursky on The Loving Story to talk to her about being her impact producer well before I applied for the job at Full Frame. And Nancy Bursky, of course, is our founder, who made the documentary The Loving Story. So that's how I got into producing and made that switch. And then we moved and we came to Chapel Hill. And at that point, our daughter was 6 years old when we moved. But when the Full Frame job came open, she was going to middle school. And so that changed. It's really, you have an older child who really is starting to want their independence. Whereas when we moved to there, it was all about, walking the dog every morning with her to school and being with our neighbors and a different part of my life.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned a couple of films that I've always admired and everything. And I was just wondering, because I do remember that there used to be that attitude, and this was one of your early films, about within Hollywood and within the whole entertainment industry, the kind of cigarettes is cool. And I think that that's kind of what your film dealt with and everything. So I was wondering, when you did that film, how was the exploration of that topic? Because I remember, of course, remembering, and I'm digging myself when I say this, but watching commercials that had like the Marlboro Man and things of that nature, which we don't see on TV at this day and time. And I don't even know that we see that many. Well, I guess we do see some characters that are smoking, but probably not as much as we did in the past. And that was one of your early films. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you got involved with that early film and what impact it might have had on what we're seeing now.
Wow. Yeah. It took 10 years for us to get tobacco added to the rating system as a qualifier. But there were two factions in tobacco control at that time. There was CDC, who I worked with, who is a non-regulatory agency. So they would never say you got to slap an R rating on something. But then there was a group out of USCSF, so San Francisco, University of California. And they still, to this day, were pushing for a mandatory R rating if you smoked on camera. And I just thought that showed a lack of understanding of how entertainment works. It's a health issue on the set. It's, secondhand smoke and the smoking of an actor really affects everybody around them. And so what we decided to do was go about talking about that issue, taking into account two things. One was censorship. And what censorship means in the entertainment industry when you're told that you can't do something in our country on camera, and what a chilling effect that can have on creativity and on that business, frankly. Mm-hmm. And then the second one was that it was ineffective, that you would have an R rating, but by the time that goes to DVD or streams, or at that time we didn't have streaming, or moves on to television, the damage is done. If a child sees it, they're going to eventually see it, and it's not going to be removed. So that R rating was a false way of getting it done. What we did instead was, by gathering together really powerful people in entertainment, and talking directly to the entertainment industry, the film got distributed within the studio system. And the studio system started to rewrite how they wrote scripts and reviewed scripts for tobacco use. So it was a lot of going between health agencies and government agencies for me, and then going back to the entertainment companies and having a discussion about, how does this work for you? They're very different types of companies, and they don't speak well to one another. And so my job was sort of to be that interpreter in between. Mm. And I'll just say, when you have a person like Sean Penn, who is a prolific on-screen smoker, but one of the best actors of our generation, talk about smoking on screen, you also have to talk about the fact that Sean Penn's father was a blacklisted writer. Wow. And when I would go around to universities with the film, I discovered that many young people didn't know what the blacklist was. Wow. And so, re-educating young people that, like, there was a time where you could be called, you could have your job taken away for what you put on screen, for what you talked about. And I think, it's a lesson to talk about today of what does it mean to censor work. And we see that in many different aspects now with media ownership. So it's a background that I have in the business part of what we do.
Yeah, definitely. And another film that I alluded to earlier, which I know that you were also a producer of, and that was some time back as well. But I know here on the show, we've actually had a lot of our guests and other panels that have talked about the way that we treat mental illness and things of that nature. And then you did that film that dealt with creativity. And a lot of times there's a thin line between creative genius and what we now consider various forms of mental illness. I know that there are a number of great artists, including even Charles Mingus, the great jazz artist, that was committed into a mental institution at one point in his life and everything. And there have been a number of others as well. So what are some of the things that you learned when you were producing that movie? And also, how did that movie come about?
So that movie came about, a neighbor in Chapel Hill who is now no longer with us, asked me to meet this young man, Philip Brubaker, who was the director of that film, who was very open about his own bipolar disorder. And he wanted to make this short film about art and mental illness, and the people he knew in the community who their art was somewhat medicinal and helped them with whatever disorder they had. And we made that film together. He was extremely young at the time. And he actually was in the first class of MFAs at Duke to get his MFA in documentary experimental arts, which is run by Tom Rankin, my former boss at the Center for Documentary Studies. And Philip and I made this film. And some of the most important things I learned is that, as effective as we can see that art therapy is, it is not something that the insurance companies will reimburse you for. So they'll reimburse you for, occupational therapy, but they won't reimburse art teachers for art therapy. And yet we can see it in the data and in the day-to-day life that art therapy often helps someone with a mental disorder. It helps them organize their lives around something and gives them a task that a part of the brain becomes more organized around. And at that time, we were just starting to learn with functional MRI to be able to look at the brain while that work was starting to be done. And it's clear in the functional MRIs that it works. I think what was surprising about the film was that psychiatrists who have become so distanced from patients by pharmaceuticals and things like that really took to it. And what I would hear back from the doctors in particular is that it re-engaged them with the patient, that it reminded them of why they had wanted to go into that to begin with. So we know in Durham and in the Triangle area, we have a huge problem with that, and not giving resources to those in our community that have real mental illness. And it's got a cascading effect in crime and homelessness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Overburdening of our resources, our police, our jails, et cetera. It's not what those people need. It was a really great opportunity.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a great opportunity. Also, what is it like when you get, because I saw that you had gotten, and you mentioned Nancy's movie, Loving You, and I know that one of my other produces here and is involved with a number of our shows actually comes from a mixed family. So he actually talks about how his parents, it would have been against the law, because a lot of people forget that mixed marriages were actually against the law until into the 70s, which is not that far long ago and everything. I think he said 73 or 74 or something like
Right.
that in a lot of places, that it was not actually legal. So what was it like to get that thank you in that movie, and what was your role in that movie, Loving You and everything? So I would love to hear about how
Oh, it
you
was
were
so
involved in
small.
that.
It was so small. I think I was among the handful of people, though, that did say to Nancy, Nancy originally was not going to direct the film, she was going to produce it.
Uh-huh.
And I was one of those people who called her after looking at what she had and said, you should make this film, you should direct this film, you're ready, take that leap. The biggest role that I'd say I had is at that point, I was already the director of the festival.
Uh-huh.
HBO had the film and very much wanted to premiere it at the Tribeca Film Festival, which historically happens right after our festival, but they demand a premiere, which means we wouldn't have been able to show it.
Wow.
And I got on the phone. Nancy was a little distraught. She didn't know what to do. And I got on the phone with HBO and I said, look, you can premiere this at Tribeca among 100 other premieres and it will get lost, or it'll get some footing, but it won't get what it'll get in Durham, North Carolina, in a historically segregated house where the director was the founder of the festival. You need to give us this film. And it was truly, to this day, one of the highlights of my career at Full Frame, and I've been there for 10 years,
Right.
was Nancy walking out on that stage, and our then head of production, Ted Mott, I'd walked off stage, I'd introduced her with all the love in my heart, and he said, look around. And I turned back, and everybody was on their feet in Fletcher Hall.
Yeah.
And it was just such a joyous moment. We had the Loving's daughter with us. We had one of the attorneys who tried the case when he was a young man in front of the Supreme Court. It's just one of those magical moments in Fletcher Hall I'll never forget.
What are some of those other magical moments that, if you can reflect on it, like you said, it's been a 10-year career now with Full Frame, that you remember? So what are some of those other magical moments that really mean a lot to you? Because like I said, whether it's you, whether it's Nancy, whether it's a number of the other members of the staff that I've gotten to know and call friends, I see that y'all are really engaged, really enjoy being part of the festival. I just consider y'all all part of that great Full Frame family. But I was just wondering, what are some of those great moments that you can reflect on and remember?
God, Marc, that's such a loaded question. There are so many. I would say that they almost always center around seeing how moved someone else is by the crowd, by what we've created and the space we've made for them. I remember the world premiere of If You Build It, which is set in Bertie County, and the director was standing in the back of Fletcher, and everybody had leapt to their feet. And I don't know if you remember this film. It's all these disaffected young people in Bertie County, and these design instructors come in and they learn to design and build things together. And they eventually build a farmer's market that helps revitalize their main street. And the director was standing there, and I put my hands on his shoulder, and he turned around and he was just weeping because the audiences at Full Frame are the best audiences you're ever going to get. And we hear that again and again. And, these filmmakers, they're not wealthy people.
Right.
It looks like there's a lot of money in documentary now. There isn't. There's a handful of rich documentary filmmakers, but there aren't many. They're coming because they can be with each other at Full Frame and be with a really meaningful audience that just loves them so much. And it's all centered around that. Those are the moments that really resonate for me. And I can think of the individual films and the individual filmmakers, but they all center around that. I'd say that and being backstage with Sadie before opening night, because it's just so nervous. We're both, I'm just always like a cat on a hot tin roof. I'm just so nervous at that moment. And it's been 10 years, and she's been a colleague and a friend for all that time. And in particular, I remember the year my daughter was going to college and she was having her first daughter. and
Wow.
she was pregnant, and just that sort of sitting with me like, I'm about to send my daughter off and you're about to welcome your daughter in. And those are just really beautiful moments I'll always remember. Always, almost always, though, I'd have to say the barbecue,
Yeah.
because the barbecue is when we really see our, both the documentary and the Durham community together. We're exhausted, so I'm almost always crying my eyes out. But you see people who you really respect in the industry receive the love that they deserve. And that just means everything.
Yeah, yeah, I can see why that would mean a whole lot. One of the things that we've seen in the world lately, particularly with all that's going on, whether it's BLM or whether it's the pandemic, is the power of the arts. And I would argue the power of definitely documentaries. I would love to, if you could speak to that as well, what you've seen in that growth, even in the documentary world, because it just seems to me that a lot of what we're seeing now is the arts being used, and it's been used that way historically, but even more so as a tool to get off some very powerful messages. So I was wondering if you could also reflect on that.
I think documentary, it's such a big question. A couple of things. I think documentary, because it still only represents like less than 1% of the theatrical marketplace. So it's still, as much as it's out front now, it's still actually not the largest moneymaker of the entertainment industry. So there's less risk, right? There's less financial risk there. So we've seen women, people of color, et cetera, get more opportunities in documentary than historically they've had in Hollywood. But I also think there's an immediacy. So as the technology of filmmaking became something that was digital and handheld, documentary really benefited from that in a way, and so did news journalism, in a way that other parts of the industry were slower to follow.
Mhm.
And so it democratized the industry to a certain extent, that I could be out on the street and grab my camera and capture this thing immediately, right?
Right.
But there's still a discrepancy, and there's a historical colonialism in documentary, even from the very first documentary, which we look at, which we're all taught is Nanook of the North, right? A, it's staged, and B, it's about a white person making a film of someone of color. And so, again, documentary is the entry point, I feel, for the whole industry to make the change happen. So not just filming something and showing the world, hey, we need to change, this is important. And that can be any issue, from climate change to race to gender, right? I mean, world peace, you name it. But I think it's also about how we make work and who gets to make the work and who gets to tell whose story. I think that's a little more immediate in documentary. Documentaries don't take years to make. Many of them do, but by and large, they're a year or two in production, not 5 years going through the studio system. So it's a more pliable platform in many ways, and I think all of that came together to a sweet spot. Now we have problems with that too, in that the content providers are becoming the content makers as well. But that's what happens in all of entertainment.
Mhm.
Like in the old days where Sundance was about, truly independent work, and they struggle to keep that now, because then the studios opened their own independent arms, right? But they're still studio films. So it's complicated, and how we work to make space for the truly independent voices is as important as our friends at Netflix and ESPN and these great places that are making great films and giving voice to them. So we need to keep both afloat. And I think that's what the more prominent documentary festivals can help do, I hope.
Yeah, because you raised an interesting question that I hadn't really thought about, but I was wondering if you're seeing more of that, because we are seeing like the Netflix and the ESPNs and those big corporate kind of companies that are stepping into the documentary world. And I hadn't really thought about how that might be impacting the independent documentaries. But it sounds to me like you're saying that that is something that they probably both welcome, but at the same time fear to some degree, because if those big corporations might push them out. And I know that that's something that can be a concern. So I was wondering, is that a correct reflection that there is a fear that some of these kind of like corporate type documentaries could also be pushing out some of the more independent voices?
Yeah, I wouldn't say pushing out, because I think there's more and more platform for independent voices, but whose voice is louder? And I think there's positive and negative. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I was able to connect some Durham filmmakers to ESPN or to some other places to pitch their work. So, we're able to be a conduit in some of those ways, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes that person pitches their work and they get picked up. There's not a million jobs for everybody, or a million berths, if you will, in the streaming world or in the broadcast world. I think it's a positive and a negative. The positive is, again, people don't see documentary as broccoli anymore. And there is more work, and there are more platforms for independent work. If it weren't for documentary, and nonfiction work, a large part of our entertainment industry wouldn't have been operating for the last 6 months, because they've been able to show that work and keep that work alive. So yeah, I think there's definitely a positive and a negative. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I do think we have to work hard to find places for the independent voices.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Got to find those places for the independent voices. I know that sometimes one of the things that I oftentimes hear is that folks will try to stereotype, for lack of a better word, as Hollywood as being very much of a liberal or progressive platform and everything. And while I definitely agree that there are those voices, one of the things that I've even noticed in Full Frame is that there are all kinds of voices out there. Because I mean, there have been some films that I have seen at Full Frame that I would argue are definitely have some conservative kind of values in them and everything, no matter what the issue is. Just like there might be some of those quote unquote more progressive values that are said as well. So that's one of the things that I've noticed. It seems that y'all try to do on a regular way, is to have a balance, like not like try to curate it that way, but it does seem like there seems to be an attempt to give like a little bit of the right, a little bit of the left, a little bit of the various voices that the community has. Is that a correct assessment on my part? Because it does seem to me that y'all try to offer a lot of voices. And I know that the stereotype that exists from certain places like 1600 is that all media is this liberal bastion. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that.
Look, I think no matter where you stand, somebody's to the left or the right of you, right? Really rare that you're all the way to one extreme or the other. And it is not how we purposely curate, but we are looking for films that are going to generate discussion that we think our audience wants to see or needs to see. And it's our place, it's not our opinion, it's our place to carve out a space for the discussion around the opinion, even if you disagree. And I've said for the last several years, and we couldn't be more divided than we are now, and you've probably heard me say, I'll get up on opening night and I'll say, I want you to bring somebody this weekend who doesn't agree with you. I want you to bring somebody who you don't share an opinion with. And we've lost that. We've lost the ability to have a discussion where we're not fighting to the death over an issue. And I think it's, for me, the best documentaries and the documentaries I like the most are firmly in the gray zone. They are firmly where you walk out and you go, gosh, I don't know what I think, but it's making me think. And that to me is a great documentary. It's so hard in the field because you're looking at a film and it's not journalism. It's definitely allowed to have a point of view, but you also don't want a film that's propaganda, right? And to somebody, some of those films are going to look like propaganda, right? And it's really about, it's so completely subjective. It's really about where you stand. So again, I wouldn't say that we're curating deliberately to have that, but we are curating to have a wide berth of work. And that's not just in the subject matter, but in the form and how we tell the story and how a filmmaker is working. So, in the old days, documentary was, a bunch of charts and somebody with a plant over their shoulder giving you an interview, right? And they're all weighted to this side of the screen, right? So that's not the case anymore. Everything goes, animation and new ways of telling story without sound, with a lot of sound. Short form, I mean, it's just exploded. It's exploded. And how lucky are we that we get to explore all that?
No, I agree. We're definitely lucky. And as you were saying, I was thinking that one of the greatest films I ever saw was actually not a documentary, but it was a film that I had that reaction when I left. And it was actually a remake of a horror film, but I remember when I first saw the first remake of Cat People, because I think I was in college at the time in the
Wow.
mid 80s and everything. And I just remember coming out of that film because there was a lot of subject matter, even though it was a fiction film, there was a lot of subject matter within that film. And I remember me and my fellow schoolmates at the time were just having a lot of questions around the character, around a number of things that were going on in that film. So I had one of those kind of moments that you're talking about where you come out of a film and you just have a lot of discussions around the film because
Right.
of everything that you experienced.
And it really is about great storytelling, and we all love stories. It's
Yeah,
human to love stories in every culture. So,
right.
whatever form those take, I always think of Full Frame as that opportunity for the community to come together and listen to stories.
Right.
And, hopefully you don't just go to bed after a story, you want to talk about it.
Yep, exactly. I agree. That's something you want to do is you want to talk about what you learned and all of that. Speaking of what you learned, we are in the middle of this pandemic and everything, and y'all had to pivot. Like so many folks, I'm actually on the board of the Carolina Theater. So what was the pivot like this year? How did y'all manage to show? Because I did know that y'all showed some virtual kind of things in order to stay active and involved and things of that nature. So how did that work out? And what are the plans? As because I'm hearing some communications that we might not be out of this in terms of vaccines and everything else until like spring or even summer or fall of next year. So
Right.
is the plan to have a live full frame? I hope so, because I love being there in that environment. But if it's virtual, I can also understand that. So what was it like to pivot this year in 2020? And what are the plans right now for 2021, given that they
Okay.
may
So
change?
how to tell this story that doesn't bore everybody, but also doesn't cause me to have, post-traumatic stress on camera. So we were canceled, just to remind everybody, March 10th by Duke, and that meant it was less than a month before Full Frame. Full Frame was scheduled, I believe, to launch April 4th last year, and we're always that first week of April. So we were next to South by Southwest. We were one of the major festivals canceled, the closest to when the world shut down.
Right.
So in other words, everything was ready to go, and we had very little time to pivot. On top of that, we had a staff person who was leaving and another person who was also going to leave later. And because we are employees of Duke University, we're under a hiring freeze, so I can't refill those positions. And Sadie, of course, who's our artistic director, would have been fine to have an April festival, but she was also having her second child. So in the pivot, we were losing people just that were expected to be lost. So there were only a handful of us. Add to that our new marketing director, Emily Foster, who I adore, who I stole from Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Film Festival, and I'm so happy we did, and Lisa Moore, who is our head of development. They had never been through a festival before with us, so they hadn't had a go. So all of that just sets the tone for you of what we were dealing with. It was a really impressive move by a great team of people. We met the next morning and we started triaging who needs to be connected with first, second, third, in what order, and what are we saying. And then everybody went about doing that. There were certain things, though, that we couldn't do quickly because the world hadn't adjusted yet. So, for example, as you know, we're an Academy Award qualifying film festival.
Right.
So that meant, well, what's going to happen if we put a film online? Does it lose its status? Because in the old days, if you streamed before you showed in a theater, you'd lose your ability to get an Academy Award. Well, the Academy just hadn't met yet. I mean, they hadn't figured that out yet. And that isn't the same for documentaries as it would be for features. So there are different pieces of the Academy that need to meet to make that decision. And, you might think that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is this big fancy organization, and in many ways it is, but their staff is just as small as we are. So, that staff was working as desperately as they could and as quickly as they could. So we adjudicated all the awards remotely. So everybody got paid. Everybody who won an award got their award money. All of our award sponsors said, yes, absolutely, hold on to our money and pay people. So that was all done with a distance. We had to find an online platform that would work really quickly. In the end, it couldn't work with the payment systems at Duke. And so we thought the most elegant thing to do would be refund everybody and offer it for free. Okay. Because the other thing that we didn't want to do is we didn't want to open it up for pay, in other words, to charge tickets to the whole world, because our role as a festival in the festival circuit is that those films are coming just to show to this part of our audience. That doesn't just mean Durham, that means the full frame audience, which includes really important filmmakers who are Academy voters who come down from New York, or they come in from LA, or they live in the rural South and they're coming to Full Frame to see those films. So our audience is made up of many different sectors and segments, and we had to somehow figure out how to capture that, get the right security around those films, honor our sponsors and our agreements, and move all of that forward as quickly as possible. And we wanted to move it forward before AFI docs in DC took place, who had more time to adapt, and also before the end of our fiscal year, which was June 30th. So that's how you saw what you saw roll out.
Right.
There were some happy discoveries in that. So one happy discovery is it's clear that there are people who really value our curation and don't need to come to Durham, and that won't sabotage our audience. So in the old days, if you had asked me, if you could put this online, would you? I'd say, well, no, I want people to be in downtown Durham and, booking hotel rooms and going out to restaurants and all that. We have room for both audiences now. That wouldn't have been true 10 years ago. So that's number one. Number two is the technology. The technology has changed since even March when this all happened, right? Yeah. There are new platforms emerging that are better for Q&As and things like that. Mm. But the last thing I'll add is that our teacher program, which happens at the festival, just exploded. It absolutely exploded in a positive way. So instead of having 6 Durham public school teachers come to the festival, we now have 5 different components. The next one will be on October 21st. It's still completely free and underwritten by Mary Duke Biddle and other donors. And it now has 60 to 80 teachers from South Africa, from India, from Puerto Rico, from New York. All these teachers finding one another and sharing best practices using this program that we developed, taught by a Durham public school teacher, Davis Harper, and allowing teachers to use our program in their classrooms at a time when they need it more than ever. Oh, yes. So again, there are like some happy accidents, if you will. And that one on October 21st is about creating empathy using documentary film in the classroom. So just, we're learning gobs and gobs and gobs.
Yeah. And what are the plans for 2021? Is it going to be a live in-person festival, or do you have any idea yet what that's going to be?
I am working as hard as I can to figure it out. I wish I had a Ouija board that worked and could tell me everything. I could tell you this. I think a lot of festivals will keep the online component whether or not they can have a physical event. And it's really good to know that we can help spread those filmmakers' films if they want us to online, or if there's someone, we have people that come in every year from other states that if they aren't able to come, or maybe they're immunocompromised and our world is only partially opened, they'll still be able to access that work because now we know how, right? Yeah. Now we know how to get it out. But I think we will probably try as best as we can to have a physical event. I don't know when yet. I have some thoughts, but we owe that to Durham. We owe that to our city and to our state and to our friends in Durham, because there are restaurants and hotels. We are the busiest weekend for a lot of businesses, right. And we have to try to bring that back to our main street. We really do.
Yeah, well, I know I'm looking forward to it whenever you get a chance to do that and get it back there and everything. But I was also.
It won't be up to us. Yeah. It won't be up to us. It'll be up to Durham and the city and Duke to make that determination. But
well, I hope they do it, because, like I said, they are definitely a And I agree that y'all are such a resource and everything. I was actually reflecting on a couple of conversations I had where we talked about the importance of full frame to the community and everything of that nature. Because actually, one of the conversations came up with a film that was before your time and everything. But I think that the first time that I saw the film that dealt with Shirley Chisholm's historic run for the presidency was at Full Frame,
Sure.
several years back and everything. And I just remember that as being a very powerful film. And of course, it came in when Kamala got picked to be vice president and everything. So
And
it was
it's
a
being
conversation.
rescreened. It's being rescreened at Duke, I want to say, really soon. And we've been showing work all summer online and doing Q&As with the filmmakers where people can write in their questions. We showed The Fight, which is about the ACLU online. We showed Boys State, which is just a huge film looking at our democracy and how our democratic system rolls through the lens of Boyd State, which is an organization in every state. We have one coming up where we haven't put the date on it yet, but we have a new vice provost of the arts, John Brown at Duke,
Yes.
who many people know as a musician. And John actually was featured in a film that won our best short, I want to say it was 2012, called One Night in Kernersville. It is such a beautiful film. It was directed by Rodrigo Dorfman, who's also a local. And we're going to rescreen that online, and we're going to do an interview, a sit down with John, now that he is Vice Provost of the Arts at Duke. And that's exciting. We're looking at rescreening Lance, which was part of our lineup, an ESPN film, and having a discussion with their director. So we have a lot coming up, and hopefully we'll be able to show our Grand Jury Award winner as well, Mayor, which won the Grand Jury Award. It's about the mayor of Ramallah in Palestine. And it's a great verite film. I really, really love this film. So we've been staying as active as ever. You just have to be on our website or on our email list and tuning in.
Sounds great. And I know a lot of folks will be checking the website out, and they'll be trying to learn more about what's going on. As a matter of fact, I'll probably put that on a banner shortly and everything, because it is fullframefest.org, if I remember correctly, for the website. So I'll actually put that on so that folks can check out what's going on and they can learn more about what's going on at the festival. But I'm always amazed. You said that it's only 1% of really, I guess, Hollywood and things of that nature, but it seems to have more of an impact, because I keep thinking about even the great actors and actresses that I have seen that I have known from Hollywood that have appeared right here in Durham, North Carolina at the festival. Like I know Danny DeVito and a number of others in history have appeared, because while it might be a small part of the population of what goes on in Hollywood, and you did spend a little time there, it seems like it is very much of a important part to that larger community, because it seems to me that a lot of our big time actors have a great appreciation for the art of documentary. So would you agree with that? And what do you think is the appeal to those that are in the more mainstream acting community? Because it does seem to me that even when I read interviews with them, they will oftentimes allude or talk about some documentary film festival that they watched or something that was in that documentary area. So I was just wondering if you have noticed that as well.
Well, first of all, I mean, truth is stranger than fiction. So a lot of the stories you're looking at, come sometimes from a documentary or from a true life story that then gets adapted into a narrative film. But documentaries are less expensive to make, and they're faster. So they don't make you as much money back necessarily. So for an actor who's in the field, that's not where they're going to make their bread and butter. However, I think people go into acting, they go into the business by and large because they want to make the world a better place, because they want to change the world. And a way they can do that quickly and effectively is through documentary and supporting a documentary, lending their voice to a documentary. A long time ago, it used to be, who could you get to narrate your documentary? So that name was on there. Now it's about who can write an original song, right? And win an Oscar for the documentary. Anything you can do to get attention for whatever issue it is that you're trying to put out there. And they're not all issue-based films. Right. Sometimes they're just story-driven. And great stories, like I said, are what what moved people, whether it's a narrative film or a documentary film. So I think there's always been an attraction there. I know that also, we have local celebrities like Sharon Lawrence, actress Sharon Lawrence, and
Right.
she's from Raleigh, and she always buys her parents a pass, and she comes when she can, and she's just incredibly supportive because it's her film festival. I mean, look, this year, the Academy Awards had to qualify the documentary films in a unique way. They chose 9 film festivals to qualify a full-length, feature-length documentary film. Full Frame's one of those 9. Wow. So just to remind people in Durham, that's how important this festival is to the documentary world. And documentary in Durham has a home. The Southern Documentary Fund is in Durham. Full Frames in Durham. We are a place where people move from California and come to Durham so they can live and work affordably in documentary. And I don't think it's an accident that that's where we are. It's a really unique and special relationship between our city and our festival.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. I consider you, along with some others, definitely Sherry over at the Arts Council, of course, Angela over at Hayti, and a number of others, John, who you just mentioned, to be one of the leaders in our artistic community and things of that nature. What, in your mind, does it take to be a leader in the artistic world for those that might think that they want to even step into leadership roles and things of that nature? So, in your mind, what does it take to be a true leader in the artistic world? Because like I said, I definitely consider you to be, and have considered you that for a number of years, to be one of our great leaders here in the area.
I don't know if it's only the arts, but and thank you. I'm flattered that you say that and humbled by it. I think it takes a couple of things. One is understanding rigorous fiscal responsibility, that just because you're doing art doesn't mean that you should waste money or you spend money flagrantly, right? That they don't have to be divorced from one another. So one is being responsible with resources, but also taking care of artists and making sure that artists come first. I think it's also about understanding that the arts matter to our community, and it doesn't work if your community doesn't understand that. So an arts leader's job is to articulate and advocate for the importance of the form to your community. Because if it doesn't matter to the community, you shouldn't be there, right? So I don't think it's an accident that our film festival is a documentary festival and we're in the Research Triangle, which is one of the most, diverse yet highly educated areas. I think documentary speaks to all walks. The fact that we're able to show documentaries to young people, teach young people how to make documentaries and have an entree into the industry and understand you have everything you need to learn how to do this. That's really exciting to me. And the fact that we're then tethered to a university and a center that teaches documentary in all forms. I think being a leader is that. I think it's saying we matter and we're a good buy. But you would have to ask all those other great people who you mentioned, because it really is about passion and responsibility.
It seems to me it's about passion and responsibility. And I did see that thing that you said on another interview platform, and I don't even remember which one it was, but you also talked about the importance of teamwork. And I've noticed that with one of the things that you definitely are very much about. You mentioned Sadie, and there's a number of other names that you mentioned as well. So it seems to me that one of the other things that's very important with any of the artistic groups is that concept of teamwork. So I'd love to hear you talk about that importance as well, because I know that with the Forefront Festival, it can't be done with a team, and you definitely have one of the most amazing teams that I've ever seen in action.
Thank you. I wish I could take responsibility for every one of them, but they're all geniuses in their own right. I'm really glad you said that. I think, one of the interesting things is when you remember when the tech bubble started and they were all like, oh, we work in this different way. We bring together special talents and we come together and then we disperse and we do it. We only bring together the right people for a short period of time. That's what the arts have done forever. I mean, think about it with music, right? I'm going to do this gig. I really need a great bass player for this particular gig. So you're going to come in for this gig and then you're going to go away. I think it's about recognizing who's best at that job. And we, of course, have a small full-time team. And you'll often hear me say to them, I'm like, I don't need to have the best idea. I just need to hear it when it comes up. Or I'll say to Emily in marketing, I'll be like, this is your expertise, not mine. You tell me. So it's really just being the hub of that wheel with all those talents who are really, really good at their job. Sadie is one of the best curators in the United States of documentary film. It would be folly for me to come in and say, oh, that's okay. I'll program the films. You do something else, right? When you have this amazing talent with you. Same thing with Lisa Moore, who's come in. She's such a great thinker around development. She has horsepower for days, and the way she thinks about the work and the way she keeps it organized. Dan Partridge, he's been with the Center for Documentary Studies for 20 years. You know, someone who understands not just the work, but how the work can be presented and how to stay organized. And lastly, Chris Everett. And Chris is a filmmaker. He is so important in our community. He understands audience building. He understands social media. He understands youth. He understands so many different aspects of the work that we do. So we have an amazing team, but it's also those seasonal people that come in and the companies that we work with that, again, I'm not worthy. You know, if we bring in a sound person, you know, they're the ones that hear better than I do. So it's just from the Durham Hotel to the Marriott to the Convention Center to Fletcher Hall and the Carolina Theater, all of our partners, American Tobacco, these are just amazing partners that we have that all come together to make Full Frame what it is. And I'm not even mentioning Duke. Right. You know, there's just, and it's such a team effort. And I take that from city manager all the way down, you know, to the bike cops who are, you know, around our landscape. I mean, it's every single piece of Durham is activated to support that team. So thank you for saying that.
Oh, no problem at all. It's just the way I feel about it. Like I said, I've definitely always thought that the festival is an amazing festival. One of the things that we've talked about here on this platform and everything, and I just wanted your thoughts about this, is the arts and the importance of art. And I sometimes think that too often, both on the academic and on the, and I mean both on the lower academics, like grade school on up to college, that we don't get enough support of the arts from our greater community. So I was wondering, do you think that as well? Because I sometimes think that we need to have more thought around critical thinking and around the importance of art to the development of critical thinking. And I don't know that we do enough of that in our academic settings. And I wish that we did more of that. I know that y'all do a great job in terms of teaching and making sure that the college kids learn about documentary film festivals. And I have another question about documentaries shortly, but I was just wondering your thoughts on the importance of arts to education.
Well, that's part of why we built Teach the Teachers, because you know, what will often happen is a documentary film will come into the classroom and it will have a study guide attached that was written by a very well-meaning, you know, PhD. But that PhD hasn't seen the inside of a classroom, if ever, in a very long time. And so what that program does is enables the teachers to write their own study guides. How do I engage with the film from my own point of view, knowing my students, my classroom, my schedule. The public school system is not built for arts education in any way, shape, or form. And it just gets more and more bureaucratic, and it's no individual's fault inside of it, but it's a very difficult system for art to thrive in. I think DSA does a great job of it, Durham School of the Arts, and we have great students that come out of that program and come into School of Doc. But we also have students from Jordan, we have students from Southern, we have students from everywhere. In Durham in that program too. I think what they miss is that arts teaches teamwork. Yeah. Like nobody makes a film by themselves, not a great one, right? I mean, you can make a film on your iPhone and cut it by yourself on your iPad or on your desktop, but really it's about teamwork and everybody having a role. Just like we just talked about with the festival, right? Somebody who's really good at camera and somebody who's really good at sound and somebody who's really good at editing and somebody who's really good at graphics. And together you make a great film. It's not how we're set up in the public school system. We're not even set up to take a group of kids and bring them into Fletcher Hall and show them a film. No. It basically takes a papal writ, you know, to get the buses and to figure out lunch and to figure out when those buses have to turn around to go get the next ride afterward. And then do we go into each individual school? It's really, really hard. So one of the silver linings right now of the remote learning is being able to disseminate that information out through people who are at home, and they can watch it on their own time. They can connect with their teacher in their own way. The teacher can connect with our expertise on their own time. So I think, again, I'm hoping we're all going to learn from this pandemic and how we've had to pivot to take lessons forward, things that have worked well, and repurpose them for our new world. But yeah, I think that's the case. I love documentary in education, because if you have a non-traditional learner, they can maybe tell you that story visually better than they can reading a book. Right. Or they can, they can hear it differently if they watch a story about it. And that should be just as valid as the student that can read a text and write you a paper.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the things you just alluded to, and I was wondering, because that was going to be my next question, is sometimes you'll hear people that say that, just like they used to say they don't like Shakespeare, that you'll hear folks say that they don't like documentary films for whatever reason, like they think they're too stiff, they think they're not creative enough, or they might give you a variety of reasons. So when you hear folks that tell you that they don't like documentary film festivals, and as an advocate of documentaries, what is your response to them, and how do you try to get them to understand the importance of documentaries?
Well, if they say they don't like documentary festivals, I simply say, well, you've never been to Full Frame. Because I don't know anybody that comes that doesn't walk away going, I mean, literally, people just, once they come, they have a great time and they come back. That said, I think in terms of documentary, I will generally respond by saying, what's the last documentary you watched? Mm-hmm. And I think part of the, again, the flip side of having so many wonderful documentaries available to us now online is people don't have a roadmap of how to choose. So how do you choose that documentary? And that's where places like Full Frame become important. And a lot of those makers, like ESPN, know that, and they put our laurels on the film. Mm-hmm. So if you were watching The Last Dance, for example, about Michael Jordan, and the commercial came up for the film about Lance Armstrong, you would have seen, official selection Sundance Film Festival, official selection Full Frame, because people know, oh, well, if Full Frame programmed it, maybe I should watch this film. And that's where the curatorial voice really comes in, is if you like the kind of films we show, then you're going to look for our name. There are other festivals like Tribeca in New York. If you like the kind of films Tribeca shows, then you should look for those Tribeca laurels. We're really curators, like museum curators. Do you like modern art? You should go to MoMA. Do you like classic art? You should go to the Met. They're curated different ways. And I think we have a very distinct curatorial voice, which is Sadie's.
Yeah, she's definitely done a good job of that. And I know that there are also, not just Sadie, but there's also that selection committee. I've had the pleasure of serving on the selection committee for the Hayti Film Festival, as well as curating that. So I know what Sadie's job is like and things of that nature. But I've had friends that have been on the selection committee, including my friend Stephanie McLean and Daryl Stover. I'm still lobbying you and Sadie to get me to be on that selection committee for Full Frame at some point or another. So I got to get on that selection committee at some point so I can add that to my list of laurels of my own.
Amen. Yeah, the selection committee. So there's a selection committee and a programming committee, and then the programmers. So you have the selection committee, which is very large because we have about 2,000 films that have to be vetted a year. They go through the original round of those, every film watched by at least 2 people all the way through. And then you winnow that down to the programming committee, which is smaller. And then finally, the programmers who make their decisions based on those recommendations. And, some of that work we're inviting, so it's not in competition. We're finding them at Sundance or at IDFA, which is in Amsterdam, and then inviting them in. We're not quite sure what level of content, not in terms of how good it is, but how much content will be available right now. Mm-hmm. We haven't opened submissions yet, but there's been a lot of production that got shut down. And there's a lot of filmmakers who are holding their work back because they want to wait until, to see where the world is. There's a lot of noise in our world right now, and it changes daily. So getting a foothold of, where are we? is important for both the makers and how they want to release their film, and for the festivals and how they want to curate the work before it goes into the marketplace. So everything's changing very quickly. But yeah, that's how that process generally works. And I would also say we work really, really hard to vary who those people are in terms of gender preference, race, age, etc., so that you're not getting one voice. You're getting many voices as much as we can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also know that in the past there were several guest celebrity curated aspects as well. So how did that work, and how did y'all go about selecting who those are? Because I know there have been a few like well-known documentaries that were guest curators, and then I think there have been some other like more like um, celebrity types, I guess, that would be
Yeah.
considered that have done the curating as well. So how do y'all go about making those happen? Because I've seen some amazing guest curated projects as well at Full Frame.
Yeah, we have what we call our thematic series, and in a usual year, we will screen. It can be anywhere from 6 to 12 documentary films around a theme. But what we do with that is, instead of us curating it, we go to a professional, like you said, and it can vary year by year. Some years we may ask a documentary professional to curate around formal aspects of the film, so how the films are constructed and how those hang together as a type of documentary storytelling or a progression in documentary storytelling. And then other times we'll go around a theme. Like the last time we had a general election, R.J. Cutler, who made The War Room with D.A. Pennebaker, we asked him to curate around political documentaries. And what have those looked like historically? So it can vary whether it's thematic or formal, right? They'll look at the form. Those are generally decided by myself and Sadie. And sometimes it happens because we have a filmmaker who comes to us and asks to do it, and we keep them in mind until we figure out it's the right year, there's the right slate of film for them to work with, et cetera, et cetera. But it's become something that people love to do. And you get these great filmmakers who'll, mention it to you and say, I know you do that thematic series, and I just was curious if that could be something I could do, and so that's how it happens. It's not written down. It's not written in stone anywhere. It's generally about ideas that come to the fore, and then thinking about, well, who would be a really good person to pull those films together with. And it's a lot of work, then we have to arrange to get the films. There's a lot of scholarly writing around it in our book. But it certainly is a unique feature of Full Frame. I don't really see it elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely, I can see that. Who would you consider some of the great documentary filmmakers that you may consider that? There's a long list of them, but I know when I think of them, I think of people like, of course, D.A. Pennebaker and Michael Moore, who's actually been making quite a bit of news because he's got some interesting theories about what's going on with Mr. Trump and everything. But those are two that I think are some of the great filmmakers and everything. But I was wondering, in your mind, who are some of the great documentary filmmakers?
Anybody who's screened a Full Frame. I'm a huge fan of Penny. I'm an unabashed fan of Penny. I think Julia Reichert and Stephen Bogner, who we just honored at our last festival, are the most incredible pair. She's so important just to our field and women in general in the field. And Stephen's work as a cinematographer and short filmmaker is stunning. I love Marshall Curry's work. I'm a real fan of Leo Chang's work. I'm a huge William Greaves fan. I mean, there are just so many people. I like Spike Lee's documentary work. Roger Ross Williams, who I think is a revelation. Ramel Ross, who I think's work is amazing. I think there's an enormous amount of women in the field that I love. I'm a big Barbara Koppel fan. I was my whole life. I like Katie Chevigny's work. There were a lot of women who moved between producing and there are editors I love, there are producers I love, there are directors I love. Like I like the field more broadly than just the director. And so there are a lot of people out there who I think are important to the field, and their voices are important to the field. It's hard to pick just one. I mean, and also there are new voices in the field. We're going to have a speakeasy. We have these speakeasies that we usually do at the festival, and we've been doing them since we shut down. We did one on putting your film out, now during COVID that had some really important voices, including Ramona Diaz, who's another great filmmaker. She made Imelda, she made Motherland. Her film right now is escaping me, which is embarrassing, but we showed it. So Ramona Diaz was part of that discussion. We also have a speakeasy coming up called Black Frame, which is a program we're going to start with Marc Anthony Neal and Jasmine Cobb at Duke. Eventually, it will mean teaching an entire semester around one Black filmmaker's work and then bringing that person to Durham and showing their work downtown during the year. But, Stanley Nelson and his whole cadre of filmmakers through Firelight have been mentioned in that. We're going to do our first Black Frame as a speakeasy. I don't have a date yet. And we're hoping to join us or some of the new voices in documentary that are using new formal ways of showing their work who are Black. Jatovia Gary, for example, Garrett Bradley, who won the CDS Filmmaker Award this year. Again, Ramel Ross, who won our Grand Jury Award with Hale County this evening. There's an entire new lingua franca in Black filmmaking that I think these three filmmakers in particular embody in their work. So there's an enormous amount of that kind of exploration that we want to keep doing. And again, it's hard for me to say filmmakers of all time or filmmakers now. There's a lot of work I love. I have a very broad palette, if you will.
Well, that's a good thing to have that broad palette and to have that kind of background and everything. Do you feel that there's I remember there was a push in mainstream Hollywood about trying to get more voices in leadership in the women's community and in the African American community, but it seems like it's not as much of a push in the documentary world, probably because it might be a little bit more democratic than, say, some of the mainstream movies. Or is there need to be a push to have more women like yourself in leadership roles, even in the documentary world? Or how do you feel that we're doing in that world?
Thank you. I think white women in particular have been privileged in leadership, at least at the executive director level. I don't think in filmmaking it's equal yet, and I don't think it's nearly as equal for people of color, particularly women of color. And I think that is something the documentary field is on fire about. In fact, Naomi Walker, who used to be at the Southern Documentary Fund, was the first person who I heard use the term "nothing about us without us." And we are trying as curators to figure out how to assess that information, because of course the film comes to us done. So how do we decide, well, who are you to tell that story, right? Who are you that you had enough people around you to be the right person to tell this story? And is that the question to be asked? And I think those issues are very, very important right now, and they are being discussed. In fact, there was a Ford Foundation report that came out early last week about that very issue. So we need to be working diligently in an anti-racist space so that we can assess what our role is in those areas. I've been having a lot of conversations with Durham native Natalie Bullock Brown, who's talked about this. She's a filmmaker as well. I know Working Films in Wilmington, North Carolina, is working on this issue. And I actually think it's a role that we have in the regional South in documentary that we need to take up in a bigger way than the coasts. And we're under-resourced here in a way that they are not. But there are many affinity groups now in documentary film, but they're really on the coasts. And, those of us in the rural South or in the Midwest, we need to find a way to coalesce around these issues and make them sustainable for filmmakers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've got to do a lot of more of that work and everything. It also seems that in all the matters that are going on, whether, like I said earlier, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's the pandemic that we're in the middle of, or whether it's our own economic downturns, that we're seeing a lot of documentary filmmakers that are using that platform even now to talk about the issues of now. So are you seeing a lot of that in what you're seeing as well? And what kind of projects do you have coming up? Because like I said, I know you're usually busy working, but I'm sure that you've got some production that you're also working on of your own. So what do you have in your own space outside of Forefront?
Well, starting with me, the answer is no. I've tried to stay away from, and I generally try to stay away from looking at friends' work or colleagues' work, because it really impedes the ability for the film to come into full frame clean. I don't want it to come in burdened by my efforts, because then it's very hard to say how it got into the festival. So I tend to stay away from that, and I give notes really sparingly on film. I often do it on narrative work because it won't conflict at the festival. So that stuff I just do on the side. Frankly, it's a full-time job doing full frame. It's particularly now when we're completely under-resourced, and I just don't know. I'm proud to say full frame has economically been very strong for the 10 years I've been here. This year is really dire. It's really dire. If you can't sell tickets, if people who donate money to you can't know, that you're going to have a festival, except that it's online, or, it's not the same economic return, and you still need to pay people and keep the lights on and pay the rent, even if you're not there. And we have all those things, just like all the other arts organizations, to do, but we depend on tickets in those 4 days. And if we can't sell them, it's hard. It's going to be really, really hard. We also ask a lot of the businesses around us, and what do they have to give right now? Like, we really need support. So I'm working through that. But in terms of, I forgot the first part of your question. I don't have any private production.
I was saying you don't have any projects of your own that you're working on, except for narrative things is the backside, but the front part of it was talking about how documentaries are actually addressing even the more current issues, whether that's the pandemic or the Black Lives Matter or our own economic downturns. And you actually alluded to that a little bit with what Full Frame is going with.
So a lot of documentarians got out pretty quickly. Or a lot of the documentarians with resources, though, because they had the resources to mask up and get the materials and figure out how to do it quickly. I live in Minneapolis, and I can tell you that a lot of Black makers I know here were not able to get out with their cameras because they were working in their own neighborhoods to make sure people got fed. Right. They were using their producerial and directing skills to organize. And so they didn't get in the field. But I'm starting to see footage from people that were in the field. And again, I'm seeing really exciting work. I'm seeing new narrative lines and ways of telling stories visually. It takes time to contextualize news and tragedies and things that are happening. Just getting out with your camera isn't what a documentary is. That's journalism. It's going to take a little time for those things to find context, whether it's George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, or the pandemic. We need distance to be able for the filmmaker to take that footage that they got and contextualize it and put it together in a way that we can make sense of it. And I think things that are happening quickly, Alex Gibney just had a film out about the pandemic, but he has enormous resources to get that done. And it's great that he got that out as quickly as he did. Other stories are going to take time. They're going to take time, and it's probably worth it to wait. One of my favorite documentaries is David Francis' How to Survive a Plague, which was about AIDS. Mm-hmm. That film's made so many years past when it was set because he went back and grabbed all that footage from ACT UP in those years in New York. And I remember those years. And I remember us not knowing what AIDS was and how they were going to organize to combat it. And, that's where we're at. It's going to take time for the stories to get told. And storytelling without context isn't really storytelling, it's journalism.
Yeah, now that you say that, it makes a lot of sense. I was just thinking about two of the documentaries that I recently watched on like the cable outlets and everything. But one was about Madam C.J. Walker. And of course, Madam C.J. Walker has a long time been gone and everything. And then the other one was about somebody that I really don't have the greatest deal of respect for their views, even though I have respect for them as a woman. But that was the film around Phyllis Schlafly, which also touched on a lot of the people that were against her, be that Shirley Chisholm, be that Gloria Steinem, or a number of other folks. But I did watch part of that series, which is also like a documentary series and everything. So I definitely remember it was called Miss America or something like that.
Yeah, but it's a docudrama. So think about that film was probably pitched 3 years ago, right? Knowing that we'd be coming into an election, So that takes time for a narrative film to be made. And I would contend with documentary, the opposite happens. They're filming now, getting the footage and then trying to contextualize what context does that have, and again, we're at a time of daily change, and I think it's very difficult for filmmakers to put work out right now that's able to tell those stories in a way that you won't be on to the next thing tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And so I think stories that last, stories that stay with us, this Ramona Diaz film I was mentioning, it's about Maria Ressa, and she's been, arrested and on trial for being a journalist. And that's something that's really scary in our country, watching, going, oh my God, this could happen here, vilifying the media, et cetera, et cetera. So those are things that we have to, it just takes time. It takes time to contextualize properly what we're living through.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of contextualizing, I know that you just mentioned docudramas, and there's one that runs a documentary film festival. What are your thoughts on docudramas? Because I think that sometimes people are worried that they spend too much time on the drama and not enough time on the factual journalism documentary part of everything. And I've heard that argument, but I've also heard the argument about how it actually brings those people to light. And then I'm going to mention something that I think might fall in that category, or some people might consider it more of a traditional documentary. But we just lost a great judicial person who I know that y'all showed the film at Full Frame. But I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the legacy of RBG, because like I said, I think that she's an amazing person, but I want to know your reflections on Ruth Bader Ginsburg and that film that was done about her. So
yeah. So the first thing is, I'm not a docudrama specialist, but I will say I think fiction is fiction, and you should let it be fiction. And if people say, but that's not how it happened, it's like, right, because it's fiction. I just think that's what fiction is. And the biggest discussion around that was JFK, and I'm like, Oliver Stone was exploring something there. It's read history. How about getting better at teaching history? And then we'll know the difference between fiction and history and docudrama. I think RBG was one of those great films, and I wish she could have been with us for that opening night. It is a wonderful opening night. Just as an American woman, she means everything. She means that I could get divorced and not be penniless. She means that I can have a job and insist on equal pay, even though we still don't have equal pay as women in the United States. It means that, freedom, reproductive freedom for people who wish that in this country. It's just, her legacy is quite astonishing. It's quite astonishing. And there isn't one female or person who recognizes themselves as female today that doesn't owe something to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her attitude about gender equality. I mean, it's very moving to me. It's deeply moving to me.
speaking of people that are moving, and this is somebody else that passed away, and I think that y'all have shown some work that at least featured him in some of the works and everything. I would also love to hear your reflections on John Lewis, who I know was before RBG, but definitely is another legacy person that we lost. And definitely, I think that you probably have some reflections on him as well, and any of the works that might have shown his life story.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many civil rights leaders that we've gotten to explore, and it's just a shame that where we are in their lives, they're older people now, and so we are losing them at a time when we need their voices most. I think John Lewis is probably one of the most courageous and humble human beings that ever walked this earth. Dawn Porter, whose work we showed Gideon's Army, we showed Trapped. She made Good Trouble, which was released this year, and I love Dawn. Dawn came and worked with our School of Doc students last summer, so she was a personal mentor to those students. I think that's a great film to look up. And her newest film, which is called The Way I See It, which is about Peter Souza, who was the official White House photographer for both Reagan and Obama, and took it upon himself to start a speaking tour about being the White House photographer and what that means to the office of the president. So she has 2 new films out, and she's a great filmmaker and somebody I like a lot, and I would look those both up. So both the John Lewis film, Good Trouble, and The Way I See It about Pete Souza.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, for those that are watching and are, we have a global audience and everything, because I know we've got some fellow producers that are out of Australia and South Africa and a number of other places. So we do get folks that are watching from around the globe. But for those that are watching that are thinking that they want to go into, well, it's actually two parts. They're thinking they want to either go into acting, which you did as a young person, and what advice would you give them? And would it be the same advice that you would give to folks if they wanted to go into either being a producer and or a festival director? So, like I said, I think that those are two vastly different jobs. So that's why I'm asking it in two different ways. So
Oh my
for those
goodness,
that,
they are. They're so, wow. In every case that you just mentioned, there's nothing I can say or not say that would keep you from that profession if that's what you want to do. They require incredible drive and passion, and there is no guarantee in any of them. They're just about drive and passion, luck, and some talent. And I think that's all I can say about it. I mean, it's just, if you really want to do it, you're going to do it, and nothing anybody says to you is going to stop you. And I'm really blessed that I've gotten to have two wonderful careers in my life, and I wonder what the next iteration will be. But I've been really, really lucky. And at the same time, I've worked really, really hard. And there's certainly no guarantee of financial success in either profession. And there's no guarantee of getting there. So you just have to love the journey.
I agree. The journey is definitely the important part, and a lot of folks don't think about the journey and all of that because it's definitely a long journey and all of that. But I'm thinking that we want you to stay in full frame for another 10 years. You said you don't know the next what the next version will be and everything, but we want you to stay in it for another 10, 15,
I
20
love
years as
Tom.
long as you can because
I
you're doing all
know.
kinds of great work. So can we
I
have you
want
for
to
another
stay.
10 years here and everything at full frame? I know that you're doing it from Minnesota now, but you can do it from afar.
Well, it's really, again, I'm so blessed. It was that, both the Center for Documentary Studies, the staff at that time, and a lot of our key sponsors in Durham really wanted me to stay on and enable me to go back and forth. So I've been doing remote leadership for a while. It really, the day they decide they don't want me to be there, I won't be there, but I love it. And I miss Durham terribly. It's not just that it's warmer, because it is. It's warmer. The people are so wonderful in Durham. Every time I come back home, and I think of it as home, I'll walk out, of my hotel room, and I'll walk over to the office, or I'll walk to lunch somewhere up on Main Street, and there's never a shortage of somebody to say, "How are you today? How you doing today?" And I just love our city that way. I love how we all hang together. I love the way it's constructed with the bulls and, Main Street, and then going down to where the breweries are. And I mean, it's just such a great, rich city. And we're very lucky that we're right at the heart of it, and that American Tobacco and Michael Goodman said to us, "I want to build you a theater. I want to put you in the center of American Tobacco so that anybody can get to us from all over the city, because the bus depot's right there." I think it's such a special place. And it's no surprise that if you read all the business journals, they say, Durham is poised to be one of those cities that will survive this terrible time. And I'm not surprised by that at all.
Yeah, me neither. Not surprised at that in the least bit. But if there was something in terms of art management or in terms of full frame management that you could change, was there anything that you would change about either art management or Durham management if there was something that you could improve about both of those? Because I agree with you that they are both great places, and I love my city, and I definitely love what we've got going on in the arts community. But I was wondering if there was something that you would like to see improved in both of those, what would it be?
I wouldn't say improved. I would say if we had more resources, I would want to do more across campus, and I would want to do more across the city. And we tried a few of those things, and we just didn't have the resources. So we still show work for free on our website, and we often show it across the triangle. And when we go back to being in person, we'll keep doing that, because I believe anybody that wants to see the work should see the work, and it shouldn't just be for 4 days. So we'll continue to do that. But the thing that I wish we could do more of is, maybe getting farther out into the state. We had a program called Common Ground where we were out in small rural areas, sharing how to do local festivals better, but really showing work out in those areas. People who are not going to come into full frame, people who wouldn't have the opportunity to see those films. And those generated different kinds of discussions than what we have at full frame. So it's really about resources. And right now, we're going to hope that we can be in person this year. We're going to hope that we can take care of our neighbors and show the work and take care of those great filmmakers that always come every year. And we'll see how it goes.
And what about for Durham? If you could change like the greater Durham artistic community, how what kind of changes do you think you would like to see in that realm if you could make any?
I mean, again, I think it's just a matter of resources. I think Durham's great. I think people are punching so far above their weight. Every arts organization in Durham that with more resources, just imagine what could happen. But that said, what our city gives us is wonderful. And I think we're all, sometimes you have to leave to see what other cities do differently to see both the positives and the negatives of that, I'm in Minneapolis. The Twin Cities has more private giving to the arts than any area outside of New York City in the United States. But when you look at fiscal giving per city, Durham really does a lot for its community and understands that the arts are tethered to the economic prosperity of the city and to visitor spending and to overnight spending. And I'm so grateful for that. There are a lot of cities that don't quantify the economic impact of their arts organizations. We're really, really lucky to be in Durham. But sure, more resources would be more work,
And speaking of more resources, you had alluded to it earlier. I know that Full Frame, just like the Carolina Theater, which, like I said, I sit on their board now, is definitely sitting, have sat on it now for a few years, but is definitely involved in financial strains, as you just put it, and everything. So if folks wanted to try to find a way to help Full Frame, what would that direct appeal be, and how could they go about helping if they've got those resources, given that a lot of folks are struggling with their own resources, but maybe
Yeah.
somebody's got some individual wealth or that's got some side money of some sort can find a way to help Full Frame. So what ways can they reach out if they've got that wealth? Maybe they got a trust fund or something that
Oh,
they
God
are able
bless
to help.
you. I think if you found yourself in a place where you could give, we have so many programs that are so important. Paying our filmmakers, for example, is something that we did this year. Usually we use that money to bring them in, but if we just had a little more resources, we could be paying our filmmakers, we could be paying our selection committee members, we could be spreading and sharing that wealth, keeping our youth programs robust, which are really important programs and funded in part by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Businesses, we do so much in-kind and cash sponsorship. We love our business partners, and we really try to tailor a sponsorship around whatever that business needs. Is it an advertisement? We can do that. Is it online shouts? We can do that. Is it something that happens at the festival itself? We can do that. We look for unique ways to partner with businesses, and we're really lucky in that manner. So really, it's about, we certainly don't want to take from people that don't have right now, but if someone finds themselves in the position where they want to support us, boy, we really could use it. And they would just go to our website and go to our development page and contact Lisa Moore or myself, and we'd be happy to talk through all the possibilities. It really is about that individual person's passion. We've had people come to us and say, I really want to give to youth, and we find ways to do that. I really want to give to filmmakers, and we find ways to do that. I really want to be able to help you do more free screenings. We find ways to do that. So it's all about ways to support the festival and how we support the community, not just like, give us your money and we'll put your name on a screen. It's really about being involved.
Yeah, definitely, and I agree. Get ready to wrap up everything very shortly, and get ready to wrap up the conversation. But I'm glad to have you as a guest here. But before I wrap up, I did want to just, like I said, coming back to the early question and everything. But and some of this is more fun kind of questions and all of that. So, what was it like working on those sets and everything way back when you were in Hollywood and all of that? Because, like I said, I've read about your work with Renee on Star Trek, I believe it was, as well as some of the other folks that you worked with. So, what was that experience like, and all of that, as well as the experience on Dallas? Because I will admit that I used to watch that show way back when, and couldn't remember even seeing your face on there, but it was a small role, so that's probably why I don't remember. So,
Well, it was the 13th season. I was a regular on the 13th season, so that was the last season of Dallas. It's a lot like making a festival. You come together as a family and then you disperse. And, Renee was somebody who actually ironically went to Duke University and was a writing grad, as I recall, and who was a friend of mine in New York before we both moved to LA, became a really important writer for the Star Trek series, Deep Space Nine and some of the later shows, and I think, oh yeah, Next Generation. I'm really showing my age. They're just great. It's great jobs. They're great families, and it's part of why when we started the School of Doc, our youth program, I said I've never been on a set where there isn't a job for every single person,
right.
And that learning how to work as a group and understanding, how your individual spoke of the wheel comes together to make the whole wheel turn is what every movie set and every TV set I've ever been on does really, really well. And if there's a spoke broken, you notice. And look how lucky I was to be on these shows that, they've been on forever. I mean, Dallas, Cheers, Star Trek, they're like the powerhouse shows. And so I got a really first class seat to see how it's done well. And I'm very, very lucky that way. I had a lot of fun in those years, and I'm having a lot of fun now.
Definitely. Is there any lesson that you learned then that you didn't learn later in life with the documentary? So, is there any lesson that you learned in the early ages with the Hollywood experience that you were able to carry on to the documentary world, or a lesson that was learned differently?
So many. Oh, many. But I think above all, gratitude.
Mm,
Gratitude. I remember when I'd only done the show, none of my shows had aired yet, and somebody, there were people, we were on location, and some people had come and asked for autographs, and I was like, I'm not a star, you don't want my autograph. And I remember one of the guys on set saying, that's what we do for our fans. And you realize it's not about you, it's about them. And I think I've never forgotten that. And I think it's so important for us at Full Frame. If you're to come to a meeting where we're talking as a staff, it's all about the audience. It's all about the filmmakers. It's not about us. It's about the audience. It's about the filmmakers. It's about really making a home. If you look at those recorded Q&As with our filmmakers that we did this summer, they all allude to how much they miss being with us because that's why they come to Full Frame.
yeah.
They're like, oh, we wish we were on stage at Fletcher Hall. We miss you guys so much. We want to be with you. And I think that's a testament to everybody who's ever worked at Full Frame and the home that we've made in Durham for the documentary community, but also for our community to feel like we all belong. Those 4 days, we all belong. We're all there together. And I'm incredibly grateful to our community for that.
No, I definitely agree with you. We're all there together. I remember the first time that well, not the first time, but one of the ones that I saw the last Full Frame was a talkback, and I want to say it was with Stanley Nelson, and it was over there at the Durham Hotel, and it was one of the most amazing talkbacks that I have seen, and he definitely was engaged. Like you said, I know he's been here a number of times, but I just remember him being very engaged with the community and very much engaged with that conversation, and I know that I learned a lot even hearing him talk back about the different movies that he had been involved with, because he's been involved with so many great and powerful documentaries. So definitely.
And how amazing was that? I mean, that was our A&E indie film speakeasy. You're sitting
Right.
there in the Durham, and he's talking about, I remember being in D.A. Pennebaker's class, and Penny was in the front row. We've lost Penny since then.
Wow.
But, there's a legacy of filmmakers. And there's the same thing for, Lorenz Grant and Stanley. There's a generational giving, right? From Penny to Stanley to all the young filmmakers that have worked with Stanley. That is, we're so lucky that we get to host that once a year.
Yeah, but like I said, that was amazing. I was just so glad to be there and to hear that. I agree with you. The barbecue is always great. Sometimes job situations with my own job, like HI and other things, would get in the way. So I didn't always make all of the barbecues, but those that I made, I did enjoy. Now, my other last two questions, and one is something that people always ask me and everything, just because I've done this in my own social life and everything. But how do you tell folks that they can manage to balance being involved with and having a relationship with somebody that is also in the business? Because as you said earlier, your husband was, and I don't know if he's still there, but he was at Playmakers. Y'all have been in the business for years. And sometimes folks are like, that's next to impossible because it's two people that are in the same industry, but y'all seem to have made it work. So I don't know how y'all managed to make it work, but what advice do you give to folks that are in the same industry in order to make it work?
I have no idea. I think nobody knows the inside of a marriage. My husband now runs the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. It's a very large institution. I will say that we understand each other's issues and struggles, and that means, if you're away, you're not away because you're, eating bonbons somewhere. You're away because you're working, and we understand what it is to love what we do. And I think, you asked earlier about our daughter, and the one thing that we said for all times about our daughter was we just want her to love whatever she chooses to do, because if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. And so we're blessed that way. And I think understanding those challenges together has made him my best friend. So, if you're in the same business, you gotta look still for your best friend. That's all.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's probably why I'm still single at 58, still trying to find that best friend and all of that. So that just be saying all of that. But
Thank you for
definitely,
having me.
oh, it was great to have you. The last question is, what advice would you give to folks that just in general? Well, I won't even say in the advice frame, because you've already given so much advice. But one of the things that we like to do on the show is we like to give people an opportunity to give words of encouragement. Like we did celebrate International Peace Day, and it is a global network. So, like I said, if you got any words of encouragement to share with people that are going through life right now, whether it's about the pandemic, their economics, the Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, just what going through life in general. And I do know that those issues impact even folks globally. So what kinds of words of advice would you give to folks that might be interested in just hearing words of advice from Deidre? And by the way, Tim Sohn, a friend of mine from Philadelphia, has been popping in, and he did say hello. And Fernando was also popping in from the
Yeah.
California area. So Fernando has been watching from California. So
Cool.
he's a friend of mine out of the California area and is actually somewhat of a activist in that community. But Deidre, what words of advice or encouragement would you give to folks that are watching right now and may go back and watch the reruns on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and a couple of other platforms that we're on? But
I
definitely,
think right now in our world, all I can say is a day at a time, sometimes an hour at a time.
right.
This is unprecedented, and just to remember that everyone's human, and 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 I'm so sorry for the people that are struggling right now and who have suffered loss in so many ways and who continue to. It's just a really painful time, and I hope that I am not the person to give advice here. I don't think anybody has advice, but I feel for the whole world right now, and I just keep putting one foot in front of the other. That's all I know how to do, and I have extreme privilege, and I'm very blessed. So sharing that with others is the best I can do right now.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that you were
And
sharing that.
vote. I've already voted. So
All
I
right.
voted early. I'm allowed to vote early up here. I have gone, did it in person, vote. Whatever you do, vote.
That sounds great. And we've definitely been encouraging folks to vote. Actually, one of our shows yesterday was all devoted around voting. So we were definitely having about 2 hours of conversation around what you just said and getting out there and voting and making your voice heard, because that is definitely so important, and definitely important to even what Deidre does, because you have to vote in order to put people in office, because I know that you talked about the importance of voting, and I do agree that we need to go out and vote on a national level, but a lot of times it's
Locally,
those local politicians that make
local, state,
decisions,
the whole
including
thing.
like funding full frame, because I know that it is oftentimes supported by our Durham City Council, and I want to say our Durham county commissioners as well. So a lot of times those are just an example of how local elections are important too, because y'all
Absolutely.
probably have to go to them annually, right? Don't you have to go to them annually in order to
We
get
do. We're
some
not
money?
supported by the county. We are supported by the city. Though we have individual county commissioners who are, fans of the festival. And we're supported by the state. We have a state arts council, so the state legislature is so hugely important, and the federal government. We get all three support. We were a lucky recipient of the CARES grant. So, yeah, who you vote for matters, and how they share those resources matter, and how they help our individual communities matter. Who the police chief is, all those votes, it all matters. And, I love how active Durham is in that. I love how Durham really, talks to one another and supports one another by and large. Every city has its problems, but I'll take Durham any day.
No, I agree with you on that, and we definitely miss you here in Durham, even though
I
you're
miss you
over
too.
in
I
the.
have to go. I actually have a call I've got to jump on, but I am so grateful that you had me on your show. Thank you.
No, I was glad to have you on the show. You're an amazing person. I've always thought of you as being not just amazing person, but as far as I'm concerned, I consider you, as well as Sadie and a number of the other members of the staff, as friends of mine. So I consider y'all to be friends and allies. And like I said, I spent some time way back in the 80s in the Midwest when I went to school in Milwaukee. And I know that there are some Minnesota connections, because even Noel came from Minnesota down to the
Yeah.
Carolina theater and everything. So I know that there are some other Minnesota connections. And actually, my favorite football team is a Minnesota team, and I will acknowledge it, because even though they're doing horrible this year, they're
They are
like
playing terrible.
1-3 or 1-4 or something ridiculous that folks in Minnesota are probably hiding underneath rugs and everything else, not wanting to acknowledge them. But ever since the Fran Tarkenton days, I've been a Viking fan, and I'm not one of those unloyal fans. I'm a diehard fan, so I'm sticking with them through the thick and thin. So it's bad times. It's got to get better. So I'm still thinking with them. But Deidre, it was so great to have you here. I know you got
Thank
to
you.
get off and get on your phone call that you've got elsewhere and all of that. As I said, the last one was the last. But if you've got any words of advice for documentary filmmakers that are watching right now that you want them to know that you haven't already shared, this is the opportunity to do that. So anything
No,
that
it's
you want to
just like I said before, you just got to keep going. Nothing you can
definitely.
say or won't say will keep a documentary filmmaker from making that work.
That is very true. So once again, I do appreciate you for being on. It was a great conversation. I'm going to bring up our theme and all, and then that will wrap up the show. If you can stick around for a minute, because I know you got to make that other call as soon as I hit this end broadcast, then I will just say hello, goodbye to you online and everything. But you can just hold on for about a minute or so. But this has been an amazing conversation with Deidre Hodge with the Full Frame Film Festival. And as you can see, the website has been scrolling across. So definitely, if you've got things that you'd like to learn, if you want to see the schedule, and I did see that the dates are up for next year, and hopefully we'll see a live version. So hopefully that will be happening. That's what I'm rooting for, and I know a number of others are as well. So definitely, it's been a great conversation on the radio show with Marc Lee right here on IBM.TV. And I will wrap it up that way with the theme song. And we'll be back next week with more amazing guests. Actually, I've got one more show to do here later on this afternoon, which is Musings, Music, and Memories. And that'll be coming your way later on. But right now, let's hear the theme song, and then that will wrap it up for this particular afternoon for this show right now.
I gotta go.